Hello everyone, welcome back to my Blender tutorial series for absolute beginners. In this series, I'm teaching you step by step on how to create your very own 3D robot character. In the previous part, we covered the basic Blender navigation system and how to move objects in your scene. In this part, we'll be going over the modeling process of the robot character step by step. And if you want, you can download this entire project file on my Patreon. So consider becoming a member and get access to my past and future tutorial project files. Alright, without further ado, let's get started with the tutorial. So let's go ahead and click on File and start a new project. Okay, we can start by deleting each of the objects in our viewport. So select your camera, hit X to delete, the cube, X to delete, and the light, X to delete. By the way, my keyboard shortcuts will be displayed on the bottom left here because we will be using some to speed up our workflow. So you always want to use reference whenever you're trying to model something in Blender. We'll be using this reference picture right here to model our mini robot. I'll leave a link in the description. Make sure you download it and save it to a folder on your system. Once you have it downloaded, let's hover over your viewport, hit Shift A, and then we will add in an image reference. Go to wherever you saved your reference photo and then go ahead and click on it and then add empty image. This will be the reference image for the remainder of the tutorial. Let's go ahead and set it up so it looks right in the viewport. We can go to our object properties right here and adjust the rotation and position. Go ahead and just select this and hit 0. So it's zeroed out on the X, Y, and Z rotation. Then we can go to the X rotation here and change it to 90 degrees. Let's go ahead and select our reference image here and use the move tool to move it back. We can turn on the snapping tool and just move it way back so it's not getting in the way of our modeling. Now we can go to the front view by clicking on the -Y here, or you can hit 1 on your number pad to go into front view. Let's go to the reference image properties right here and we can change the opacity to 0.3. You can scroll on your mouse wheel to zoom in a little bit. And again, you can hold Shift and then the middle mouse button to adjust the view side to side or up and down. Okay, so when looking at our reference image here, you can see that it's pretty easy to model once you break it down. The head is just going to be a UV sphere. The body is also going to be a UV sphere. These two legs are going to be cylinders, and then we have mini UV spheres for the arm parts. So let's start with the head. Let's do Shift A, go to Mesh, add in a UV sphere. So to get a better view of what's going on, we can actually go into wireframe mode so we can see the UV sphere and our reference image. So to do that, we can just hold Z and then drag to the left and let go to go into wireframe mode. Now with the move tool, we're just going to move the UV sphere and position it so it aligns with the face. You can turn off the snapping tool, and then we can just make sure it's more or less aligned with the face of our reference image. You can zoom in to see what's going on a little better. Let's go ahead and adjust the scale by going to the scale tool, and then we can adjust the scale on the Z-axis to flatten it out a little bit. So click on the blue right here and just slowly just bring it down to flatten it out. You can also adjust the scale on the X-axis a little bit as well. Now, it doesn't have to be the exact shape of the reference image. As long as it's in the general shape, you'll be fine. Let's zoom in a little bit more, and then we can hold Shift and middle mouse button to go down. We can actually go ahead and delete these faces right here. So let's go into edit mode, making sure the object is selected, and then edit mode. And then let's just click anywhere to deselect. Use the face select tool. And then we're just going to click and drag to select the bottom faces. Then go ahead and hit X, delete faces. Okay, now we can switch to the edge select tool. Then let's click and drag to select the bottom edge like this. Use the move tool and we'll just move it so it's aligned better. You can also select this line right here. And then instead of using the scale tool, we can just hit S on our keyboard and scale it in a little bit. We can also go ahead and start scaling each of these lines here to better align with our reference image. So let's click and drag to select this line, and then you can hit S on your keyboard, and then with your mouse, just scale it. Make sure you're only selecting one line at a time. Now we can deselect and go back into object mode. So you can either do that over here, or you can just hit tab on your keyboard, and now we're back in object mode. To stay better organized, we can rename the sphere here to head. Okay, now we can move on to the body. Again, for the body, we can use another UV sphere. So hit Shift A on your keyboard, and let's go add in another UV sphere. We'll use the Move tool and move it down. Then we'll use the Scale tool and start scaling it down by clicking on this white circle here. Use the Move tool and adjust it. Back to Scale, and we can scale it on the Z-axis this time. Scale it on the Z-axis a little more down. Okay, that's fine. Now let's go into edit mode and adjust the shape so it matches more of the body in the reference photo. So let's zoom in and let's use the face select tool and let's delete some of the top faces here. So I'm going to select these faces over here. I'll just hit X, delete faces. Then we can use the edge select tool and select this edge over here and move it up. Now select the bottom edge over here. And then instead of using the scale tool, we can just hit S on our keyboard and we can scale it like this. Again, it doesn't have to be exact. I'm just trying to get the general shape of the body of our reference image. Okay, I think that's looking good. Okay, now if we look at this part here, it's a little too straight and not rounded off. So to fix that, we can actually add in a loop cut like this. And then we can just hit S and then scale it. Let's go back and use the select tool. I want to go ahead and select this bottom edge right here by holding Alt and then clicking on this bottom edge. Now, if you orbit around your scene, you can see that the entire edge around the body has been selected, which is good. Now we can just use the Move tool and just move it a little more to the bottom. I also want to do the same thing for this loop right here. And the reason for that is because I'm trying to make this gap here on the lower belly of our robot model. So let's go and hold Alt and then click on this edge here, and we'll just move it slightly up. Let's select this bottom loop right here by holding Alt and clicking. And to make this part less pointy, we'll just hit S and scale it down a bit. We can also add in another loop cut in the middle to round it off a little bit more. So let's go to the loop cut tool, add a loop cut, click, and then we can just hit S and scale it up a little bit. Okay, we can zoom out, and now we just need to add the neck over here. So let's go and zoom into the neck, and let's try orbiting around our scene for a bit. Let's go switch back to our select box tool, and we want to select this edge over here, which surrounds the top body. So let's hold Alt and select this edge. And now let's go back into solid mode by holding Z and dragging to the right. Let go, and we can see what's better going on. So we need to close this hole here. So to do that, we can just hit F and to add in a new face. We want to do the same for our head here. So let's go back into object mode and select our sphere. Let's go into edit mode by hitting tab, and let's do the same thing. Let's hold Alt, click on this bottom part right here with the edge select tool. We'll just hit F. Now let's go back into object mode, select your body, and let's go back into edit mode. We want to add in another small face here. Now, if you remember, I showed you how to do that by using the Inset tool right here, Inset Faces. A faster way to use the Inset tool is by just hitting I on your keyboard, which also does the same thing. So let's drag in and make a smaller face. Now let's go back to our front view. So let's use the Extrude tool right here, and we'll just extrude up. Okay, now we can zoom out and let's go back into object mode. Our head and body are now complete. So let's go and rename our body, which is the sphere right here, to body. Now let's quickly add in those small spheres, which will connect our legs and arms. So again, we're going to be using a UV sphere. Shift A, add in a UV sphere. Let's drag it down, and we'll use the scale tool, or we can just hit S on our keyboard to scale it down. Let's zoom in. Let's move it to the left right here on the x-axis. We can hit S to scale it up a little bit. Done. Okay, now let's move on to making the legs. Let's hit Shift A, add in a cylinder. Let's move it down, and we can hit S to scale it. Let's use the scaling tool, and we'll scale it on the Z-axis. Let's go into wireframe mode to see what's going on a little better. So let's hit Z, drag to the left, and let go. All right, now let's go into edit mode to to edit the shape so it matches better with our reference photo. So let's start by using the edge select tool, and let's select the top edge over here. We'll switch to the move tool here, and we'll move it down. Let's use the extrude tool, and we'll make another face and extrude it up. Then you can hit S to scale it in a little bit. Extrude again, and then S. Let's add in a loop cut in the middle so we can get this shape right here. To do that, let's use the loop cut tool. Click to add in the loop cut, and then S to scale. Let's add another loop cut over here. We can move it up a little bit, and then we'll just hit S to scale a little bit. Another loop cut down here, and S scale. Let's use the selection tool, select the bottom line right here, and we'll move it down a little bit. Now to round off these edges here, we're going to use the bevel tool so it's a lot more smoother. So let's go and switch to the bevel tool here, and let's just add in a bevel. We can actually open up the bevel menu here, and we can add in more segments to make it even smoother. Let's add another bevel on this line over here to smooth it out even more. So let's go and deselect, and then let's select this line right here by holding Alt and then selecting this line. Again, make sure you have no other line selected. Make sure only this line around your leg is selected. Again, let's add in a bevel, and we'll add in more segments. Deselect, and let's do the same over here. Hold Alt, click on this line. I'm going to add another bevel. Now to get that small dark indent that you see on the legs right here, we can do that by using the bevel tool. So with the bevel tool selected, we'll hold Alt and select this edge right here. Then we'll make a really small bevel. First, click the bevel tool right here by click and drag, and then we can hold Shift on our keyboard, and we can just add a slight bevel. I think that works. Now I'm going to use the extrusion tool. But instead of extruding with our mouse right here, I'm actually going to hit E on my keyboard to extrude, which does the same thing. So hit E, and then we're not going to extrude up or down. Instead, we're going to put the extrusion back in place by hitting Escape on your keyboard. So just hit Escape, and now it's set back in place. All we have to do now is just hit S, which will add in that little indent. So scale down a bit. To see the little indent better, we can just tab back into object mode. We can go into solid mode by hitting Z and swiping to the right. Orbit around your scene. It's there, but to see it better, we can go to this menu right here and turn on cavity. And now we can see the little indent right there. Let's go back into wireframe and let's just adjust this line right here. Let's go into edit mode by hitting tab and we'll use the bevel tool again. We'll hold alt and select this edge right here. First, let's hit S to scale it up a little bit. Then select this bottom edge right here and we'll add a small bevel. Click and then hold shift, just add a small bevel. And then we'll hit E on our keyboard to extrude and then escape to set it back in place. And then we'll hit S and we'll just scale it in a little bit. Okay, now let's go back into object mode. Let's go into solid view and we have our legs completed. Don't worry about the other half. We'll be able to duplicate this entire half on the other side later. Let's move on to our arms. So again, we need to add in those UV spheres for our arms. Let's add in a UV sphere. We can hit S to scale it and use the move tool and move it in place. Let's go into wireframe mode to see it better. S. Okay, now to make this connecting part right here, we're going to use another cylinder. So let's do Shift A, Mesh Cylinder. We can scale it by hitting S. Let's move it and position it correctly. We can actually use the scaling tool and let's scale it on the Z-axis just a little bit. I'm going to hold Shift and scale it up a little. And then I'll hit S to scale it down. I'll use the rotate tool and rotate it. I'll use the scaling tool. Let's scale it on the X-axis a little bit. You know what? I'll probably have to make it a little smaller. Let's scale it on the Z-axis again. Let's scale it on the Z-axis again. Instead of clicking it over here, I'm just going to hit S on my keyboard and then I'll hit Z and that'll do the same thing. Okay, to connect it better, I'm going to go into solid mode and then I'll go into edit mode, use the face select tool, select the top face, use the extrusion tool right here, extrude up, and then I'll scale in. I want to better align it, so I'll use the select box tool, go back into object mode, and let me just move it to the side. Okay, looking good. Let's go back to front view. Let's go ahead and instead of adding a new UV sphere, I'm just going to click on this UV sphere and on my keyboard, I'm going to duplicate it by holding Shift plus D and that duplicates it. Let's set it back in place by hitting Escape on your keyboard, which will put it back in place. And then let's move it down here. I'll hit S to scale it and make it smaller. Let's go into wireframe to see what's going on better. And again, I'm going to select my top cylinder right here. I'm going to go into solid mode. Let's go into edit mode by hitting tab. We'll select the top face. We'll extrude by using the extrude tool right here. And then I'll hit S to scale in. Okay, let's go back to front view. And we can use the select box tool. And let's go ahead and let's go back into object mode. And now to make this shape right here of the arm, we're just going to duplicate our leg again. So let's select the cylinder leg. Let's hit Shift D to duplicate it and then Escape to set it back in place. And then we can move it up here. We obviously have to make it smaller, so hit S to make it smaller. Let's go into wireframe mode. Let's rotate it. So I actually want to adjust the UV sphere here so it better aligns with my arm and the other part. So let's actually rotate it. And then let's select our arm and rotate it as well. I'm going to hold Shift, rotate it slightly. Okay, that works. Now I want to go into edit mode and I want to make the arms slightly different than the legs. So let's go ahead and add in a loop cut like this. Boom, loop cut, and then I'll just hit S to scale it. And then I'll add in another loop cut right here, S to scale. Let's go ahead and adjust the positioning of this part here to better align with the UV sphere. So I'm going to click on this. I'll use the rotate tool like this. I'll hold shift and I'm just going to rotate it. I think that aligns a little bit better. I'm going to select this and I'll move it down a bit because I want it to be perpendicular to this line right here. So let's use the move tool. I'm going to move it up. I'm going to move it up. There we go. Let's go back into solid mode, and this is what it's looking like so far. Let's just turn off the background image, and I want to make sure the arm is looking correct. So it looks like it's a little bit off here, so I'm going to adjust the positioning of each of these parts. So I'm going to select this part over here. I'll hold shift, select this part, and I'm just going to move it to the side. Then we'll do all three of these together. So select this, hold shift, select this, this, and I'm just going to move it to the side again. We'll also adjust this UV sphere here to rotate it so it aligns with this part right here. So we'll use the rotate tool and we'll just rotate it like this. Okay, bring back your reference image. And now let's move on to the fingers here. So we're going to make the fingers using a cube. So to do that, we're first going to select our part right here. Then hold shift and press S, and then drag down, let go on cursor to select it. Now the cursor is over here, so any object you add into your scene will spawn right on our cursor. So hit Shift A, we'll add in a cube. We'll hit S to scale it down, and we'll use the move tool and we'll drag it down. This is going to be our first finger. So let's go and position it. We can use the wireframe mode. Let's rotate it. Hit S to scale down. And make sure it's touching your model right here. Now let's make 3 parts of this finger here. To do that, we're going to use the extrusion tool. So let's orbit around our scene. Let's select cube right here. Let's go into solid mode. We'll go into edit mode and we can start adding extrusions. So use the extrusion tool. Click on this face. Oh, you know what? We're on the edge select tool. We need to use the face selection tool. So make sure the face selection tool is selected and then click on this face. Let's go back to our front view and let's click and add another extrusion. We can hit S to scale it down. Not too much actually, just a little bit. Something like that. And then we can just move to the side a little bit. And then we'll add another extrusion. This time, instead of using this manual tool here, we can just hit E on our keyboard, which will add another one. And again, we can just move it to the side. Hit S to scale down. And boom, the finger is done. Now, it's a little too thick. So let's go into object mode. And we can actually make it look more like a finger by going to the modifiers tab right here. So click on modifiers, and then we'll add a modifier. And then let's search for a subdivision surface modifier. This is a staple for any Blender modeler. We'll increase the level viewport to 2 to match our final render. And there you go. Now we can go back into the front view and let's go into edit mode and let's add in those little indents. So let's use the edge select tool. Hold Alt on your keyboard, select this edge right here, and then we're going to bevel it. So let's use the bevel tool here and we'll add a slight bevel. So click and then just a slight bevel. And then we can hit E on our keyboard to extrude and then escape to set it back in place and then S to scale in. We'll do the same on this one right here. So hold Alt, select this edge right here, add a slight bevel, and then we'll hit E to extrude Escape to set it back in place, and then S to scale in a bit. Now if you tap back out, and now we can make it longer by hitting S on our keyboard and then Z to scale it on the Z axis. Let's go back into edit mode. Let's go into wireframe. So let's select all the edges at the bottom by holding Alt and then selecting this edge. Let's make sure everything is selected by orbiting around, and as you can see, everything is not selected, so we have to manually do that. Hold Shift, select this edge, hold Shift, select this edge, and hold Shift, select this edge. Now we can go back to front view, and we can just hit G and then Z, and we can move it down. Let's go into solid mode. That's what it's looking like. Now, I think it's a bit too thick in my opinion, so we can actually select our finger, and let's just hit S to scale down. Let's go to front view. Let's scale it down a little more. And we can just make it longer by hitting S and then Z. And then we can just drag it in, up. Okay, to add a little more of a bend, let's go into wireframe, and I want to add a more bend. So let's go into edit mode. Let's select all the edges at the bottom, and let's just move it like this. Let's go tap back out to object mode. Let's go into solid mode, and there we go. To add in the other fingers, we can just select this, hit Shift D to duplicate it, and then escape to set it back in place, and then we can move it to the side. And then just make it smaller by hitting S. Let's also hold Shift, select this one, and we'll move both of them more towards the middle. Let's add in one more by hitting Shift D to duplicate, and then escape to set it back in place, and we'll move it to the side. This one is going to be the smallest one. Let's add in one more by selecting this one right here, Shift D to duplicate it, escape to set it back in place, and then we'll use the move tool and we'll just move it to the side here. Let's rotate it completely by using the rotate tool and rotate it on the Z axis. Then we'll rotate it on the Y axis like this, and we'll make it smaller. Okay, now if you haven't already, I highly encourage you all to save your work because that is very important in case you lose it. So let's go to File, and then we'll just hit Save As, and we'll save this. I'll call this Mini Robot Tutorial. We need to make sure the subdivision modifier on each of our fingers is applied because we're going to be joining all these objects together. So when we're joining the objects together, we need to make sure all the modifiers are applied on any of our objects. So let's go ahead and apply this modifier to each of our fingers. Okay, now let's go back to front view. Okay, now one thing I'll need to make sure is that the leg here is not touching or intersecting with the body here. So to fix that, I'm going to click on the leg. I'm just going to move it a little down. And then I'll just adjust the leg by going into edit mode. I'll select this top line right here with the edge select tool, and then I'll just hit S and I'll scale it up. And I'll scale it in a bit. Okay, I'll go back into solid mode and I'll hit Control S to save my work. Okay, let's bring the 3D cursor back into the middle. So let's hold Shift and S, and then let's drag to cursor to world origin. I'm going to go ahead and just select the head here and temporarily hide it by clicking on this eye tool right here. I'm also going to click on my reference picture and hide it temporarily as well. All right, now if you zoom in onto your model, you can see that this sphere here has some rough edges when it's going into the body here. So to fix that, I'm just going to add more geometry to the body by going to the Modifiers tab and adding Subdivision Surface Modifier. It's just a nice and easy way to add more geometry and more detail to your model. Okay, so if we go back to the front view, we can see that the neck is a little messed up now. So let's go into edit mode and let's zoom in. Let's go to wireframe and we can use the face select tool and delete the faces over here. Hit X to delete faces. We can add back the neck later. Now let's orbit around your scene and let's go back into solid mode. Tap back out for a second by going back into object mode, and we could apply the modifier. So let's set the render to 1 and just apply the subdivision surface modifier. Okay, nice. Now let's go back into edit mode. So to fill in this gap, if you remember how to do that, we would use the edge select tool, hold Alt on your keyboard, and we can just select this edge, and then hit F to fill in that gap. Now we can go back into object mode. Let's go to the front view. Let's deselect. Let's go into wireframe. Now I just want to select all the objects here. So let's click and drag to select all the objects. And we want to make sure the body is selected last. So it's going to be yellow just like this. If it's not yellow, you can just hold Shift on your keyboard and click on the object you want to be yellow. So for example, I can click on this object and now this is yellow, but I want the body to be yellow. So I'll hold Shift and just click on the body instead. Then I'm just going to hit Ctrl J on my keyboard to join all the objects together. Now all the objects are one object. Now the reason why I selected the body last is because the origin point, which is this yellow dot here in the middle, is going to be on the body. And the origin point dictates how the object rotates around it. So for example, if I were to rotate it right here, you can see that it rotates around the origin point. Okay, let's go back into edit mode. And now I'm going to be mirroring this half of the body on the other side, so I don't have to repeat the modeling of the legs and arms on the other side. So to do that, I'm first going to have to delete this half of the body so it mirrors on the other half properly. To do that, I'm going to be using the face select tool, and then I'm just going to click and drag and select one half of this body. Okay, we want to zoom in to make sure it was selected properly. But as you can see, I selected this face by accident. I'm just going to go ahead and go back into solid mode. I'm going to hold Shift on my keyboard and deselect this face. Okay, now let's go back into wireframe. I'm going to go back to the front view and I'm going to go to the bottom to make sure I didn't select the other half by accident. And as you can see, I selected this half by accident. We only need this half to be selected. So you can hit C on your keyboard and then hold the middle mouse button to deselect any of the faces like this. And then I can just hit escape on my keyboard to go back to my previous tool. Okay, so now it looks like this half has been selected properly. All I have to do is just hit X to delete faces. Oh, but it looks like this face has still been here. So let's go back to the front view. Let's use the vertex select tool and we can just go ahead and select the vertex like this and then press X to delete vertices. Now we can go back to solid mode and we can tab back out and we can go to front view. Let's just go to the object properties and you see the scale here. Let's just reset it. So Control A to apply scale. That's just good practice to make sure everything works properly. All right, now let's go to the modifiers and add in that mirror modifier. So search for mirror modifier. And there you go. We can see that there's a hole on the top of the body. So we can fix that by first applying the mirror modifier. And then we can go into edit mode. Deselect, and then I'll just show you again, hold Alt on your keyboard and select these vertices. And then you can just hit F to add in that new face. Okay, now let's go back to front view and we can bring back our head and our reference picture. Okay, now let's complete the head. So we're going to start with the ears. So to do the ears, we're going to go into the side view right here. We're going to go into edit mode by hitting tab. And then I'm going to use the face select tool. Let's deselect first. And then I'm going to select these faces on the side here. I'll hold Shift, select this face, this face, this face, this face, this face, this face. Let me go back to the front view and we can see that we need to select these bottom two faces. So let's go ahead and select these two right here. And then we can go back to front view. And all we have to do is then use the extrude tool. So let's go ahead and extrude outwards. Let's go into wireframe, extrude, and then we can just hit S to scale down. Now we want to add this little light part here. So to do that, we're going to add in a loop cut. So loop cut right here, and we'll add it. Well, actually, we can actually move it. So right here looks good. And then we want to make that little indent. So to do that, we'll use the bevel tool. We'll just click and then I'll hold Shift to bevel a little bit. And then I'm going to hit E to extrude. And then I'll hit escape to set it back in place. And then I'll hit S to scale in a bit. Not too much though. We'll add one more indent right here. So let's go ahead and use the loop cut tool. Let's add a loop cut right here. And then we can use the move tool. We'll just move it right here. Same thing, we'll use the bevel tool. Click and then hold Shift and we'll just bevel just a little bit. E to extrude, and then escape to set it back in place. And then S will scale down a little bit. There we go. Now we don't have to repeat the same process on this side. We can just mirror it. So let's go back into edit mode. Let's use the face select tool. Let's deselect, use the selection tool right here. And we're just going to select this half right here. Then I'll just hit X to delete faces. Okay, let's make sure everything was deleted. This bottom line was not deleted, so we got to use the vertex. We'll just select all these vertex here, hit X, delete vertices. Okay. Everything else looking good. Now we can go back into object mode, and we're going to hit Control A to apply the scale. Again, always good practice. Let's go ahead and add a mirror modifier. And there you go. We'll go back into solid mode, and we'll apply this mirror modifier. Okay, so right now, if you look at it, some of the edges are a little rough, and that's totally normal, especially for low poly models, if you're going to be using this for, say, a game. But if you want more detail, and if you want this to be more smoother, we can obviously add more geometry by using, take a guess, the Subdivision Surface Modifier right here. And that'll smooth out and round off all those rough edges on the side. And we're actually going to add in 2 levels. And that looks great. Okay, let's go ahead and apply that Subdivision Surface Modifier. And we're going to go ahead and finally add in that antenna. We're going to hit Shift A, and we'll use a cube. We'll move the cube up. Let's go into wireframe. And we'll hit S to scale it down. Zoom in. We'll just position it in the middle like this. Scale it down even more, actually. Maybe even more. And then I'm going to orbit, and I'll go into solid mode. I'm going to go into edit mode. Use the face select tool. I'll select this top face. Go back to the front view. Wireframe. I'll use the move tool, and I'll just move this face up. Okay, let's go back into object mode. And for this circle shape, we're going to be using, take a guess, Shift A. Which one are we going to use? The torus. And instead of moving the torus using the move tool, we're actually going to use this menu here. So be careful not to click anything on the side, otherwise you'll lose this menu. But let's go ahead and we'll move it up. The Z-axis. And we're going to rotate it on the X-axis by 90 degrees. Let's mess with the radius and make it smaller. We actually want to mess with the minor radius, actually, like that. And let's make it smaller. We can hold Shift for slower movements. And I want to make it thinner like this. There we go. I think that looks good. Let's go back into solid mode. I'm going to select my little cube antenna here. I'm going to scale it using the scale tool. I'll scale it on the Y-axis, make it more thinner. Now, I need to add in a face in the middle of this circular torus. So let's go into edit mode. We'll use the edge select tool. I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to hold Alt and select this middle edge right here. To add that face, we can just hit F. Now, if you go into wireframe, we still need to add in this screen right here. To do that, we're going to be going into edit mode by clicking on the head, go into edit mode, and we need to go into wireframe. And we're going to start selecting the faces within the screen here. So we'll use the face select tool. An easy way to do this is by holding Alt on your keyboard, and then we're just going to click on the rows that is going to cover the screen. So for example, we're going to select this row right here. So hold Alt, and you can just click in this line right here, which will select the entire row around the head. But we're not going to be using the faces at the back here. We're going to deselect those later. But we're just going to keep doing that like this. So I'm going to hold Alt, hold Shift now, and then I'm going to keep selecting the rows like this. Whoops. Okay, now let's go to the side view. And to deselect the faces at the back, we need to use the deselect tool. So to do that, I'm going to hit C on my keyboard. And then with the middle mouse button, I can deselect and Make sure you're holding the middle mouse button. It's not showing up here, but I'm holding the middle mouse button and I'm deselecting all the faces here. You got to make sure you're in wireframe mode as well. Okay, now let's go hit escape and let's see what it's looking like from the front. We only need this area right here. So let's go to the side here and let's hit C for the deselect tool and let's just take off 3 rows like this. Oh, we took off. Okay, let's take off 4 rows then. Boom. Oh, okay, let's hit escape and we can just go ahead and hold shift and we'll just select this face again. And we got to select the other side as well. So we need to go into solid mode and let's just select this face. Okay, let's just go into wireframe and make sure only this front is selected and not the back. Okay, looking good. Let's go to the front, see what it's looking like. I think that's good. Okay, I'm just gonna add in 1 more row at the bottom. So I'll hold shift and alt and I'll just add in 1 more row. We need to make sure we deselect these ones at the back here. So I'm just gonna go to the side view again, go into wireframe and then C. I'll just deselect all the faces right here. Boom. Let's go back to front and okay, that's looking good. That's gonna be our screen. So let's go into solid mode and now all we have to do is just use the extrude tool. I'm gonna be hitting E on my keyboard to extrude. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's hit E and then we'll extrude backwards. Nice. And then we can also hit S. So it forms the screen a little better. Let's tab back out to see what it's looking like. And there you go. Let's go to front view. Let's deselect. We could hide our picture. And we can turn off overlays. And that's what our model is looking like. Okay, now we're almost done. Let's turn back on overlays and we're just going to go into wireframe mode and let's make sure we select all the objects. We'll select the middle body last by holding shift, selecting the middle body, which will make sure the origin point stays in the middle here, that yellow dot. And then I'm just gonna hit Control J to join everything together. Okay, all we have to do now is just join the neck. So let's go into edit mode and let's go ahead and let's deselect first. Let's bring back our reference image. Let's select this face right here with the face select tool. We're gonna go into -Y view. I'm just gonna hit E to extrude up. Okay, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the edge select tool. I'm gonna hold Alt. I'm gonna select the bottom edge on our head. Hit S to scale in a little bit. I'm gonna hit S and scale it a little bit more. That's good. And then what I'm gonna do is, let me show you what happens. So if I hold Shift and Alt and select the top edge here, I'm gonna hit F3 and then we'll search for bridge edge loops, which will connect them together. But look what happens. It forms these triangles here, which, you know, isn't really the cleanest topology in my opinion. I think we can make it look better. It's not really a big deal, but it might cause issues later during the rigging process. So I don't really want to deal with that. So let's go ahead and just hit Control Z. Okay, so right now there are too many edges on this bottom row right here. We need to match the number of edges on this bottom row here to the number of edges on the neck. To do this, we need to delete some of the edges over here. The easiest way to do this is first, let's go ahead and zoom out. Let's deselect by clicking anywhere over here so we have nothing selected. Let's go to the front view. Let's zoom in. I'm going to go ahead and click on this edge right here. And then I'm going to hold Shift, skip this edge, and click on the next edge. And then we're going to keep doing this. We'll skip this edge, and then we'll click on the next edge. Now, doing this manually all the way around is going to take too long. The easiest way to do this is just hold Control, Shift, and then hit the plus on your number pad, like this. And we're going to keep hitting it until we make it all the way around. Okay, and now if you go back to the front view, it should look like this. So once it looks like this, we can just hit X and then dissolve edges. All right, now let's go ahead and zoom in into the head so we can see it a little better. And we'll hold Alt. I'm going to click on this edge right here. And then I'll hold Alt and Shift and I'll click on this edge right here. All you have to do is just hit F3 on your keyboard and then search for bridge edge loops. Okay, and now we have cleaner topology around the neck. Okay, go back into object mode and then let's go back to front view. Okay, while in front view, we see these little lines over here, these square lines. We can remove those by just clicking on our model, right click, shade auto smooth. And now you are finally done the modeling process for your character. So go ahead and orbit around your character and take a look at your work. Give yourself a pat on the back for making it this far. Let's go into edit mode and just take a look at that amazing topology. Clean topology like this, make sure that we reduce unnecessary polygons while maintaining detail and making rendering faster and performance more smoother. Okay, let's go back into object mode, and in the next part, I'm going to show you how to shade your model, which is basically the process of adding color to your character model. So make sure you hit that like button if you're enjoying the tutorial series so far. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of my future tutorials. Okay, I'll see you all in the next part.